Hi, beautiful people. My name is Ali Ayala of Star Song Reiki and Astrology with Ali. And I created this beautiful presentation on the Venus Retrograde Cycle for a recent Illuminate festival that I attended. And I wanted to take the time to record it for future reference so that you can always go back to it and look at the information I share today. Part of the reason why I wanted to create this presentation is that there's so many times we hear that a planet's going retrograde and we don't really know what it means. There might be some idea or understanding that the planet's pivoting and now moving backward or in a new direction, which is completely true during the Venus retrograde cycle. But there's also these very distinct phases of the Venus retrograde cycle that I think just adds a level of understanding and depth to her journey that can really help how you orient your experience of the Venus retrograde journey. I learned this maybe 5 years ago, and I've been working with it really, really carefully ever since when Venus, especially Venus, goes retrograde, because I just love this particular journey. A lot of what I'm going to share today is based off the work of Dane Rudyard, who's a very famous astrologer, and he did quite a bit with process-oriented astrology, which I love because I like to feel like everything's part of a process rather than things being just very linear or very like sometimes we can think that these moments in astrology are frozen in time, but really they're not because everything's constantly moving and shifting. And so in Dane Rudyard's model, he shows us that when you look at the motion of the planets in relationship to the sun, all of life is in some process of either birth or growth or full expression or like deconstruction and decay, back to renewal and rebirth. And probably the easiest and most familiar example that I could provide for you would be the lunar cycle. And that one's just, we're all so tapped into the lunar cycle because we see it. It's visible. It's so visible in the sky for us to see. And Venus has a very visible journey as well. It's different. But if just with the lunar cycle as an example, each month we see the sun and the moon, and it's very much about the moon's relationship to the sun. They come together at the new moon, and then we watch as the moon grows in the sky. She goes through this process of growth until she reaches peak expression, full illumination, and then she goes through a process of decay or diminishment where she loses her light and then comes back to the new moon for rebirth and renewal and goes through the process again. So the moon is always in some sort of process in relationship to the sun. And all of the planets are in some way. And what I'm going to share with you today is Venus's process in relationship to the sun. And so the first thing I want to look at with you is just the timing. And that's usually what I like to start with. So from January 28th through March 1st, we have the pre-retrograde shadow phase. Essentially what's happening here is Venus normally moves at a particular pace as she's moving through the zodiac. And then once she starts to hit her shadow phase, her pace starts to slow down. And she's going slower and slower and slower. And then on March 1st, Venus stations retrograde. At that point, she has come to a complete stop and is pivoting and turning around and beginning to, as it appears to us on Earth, it appears as if she starts to move backwards. And then from March 1st to March 22nd, we have what's called the Venus evening star retrograde phase. The evening star phase is something I want to talk about in detail in the presentation. And then the evening star phase comes to an end March 22nd when we have the inferior conjunction at 2 degrees of Aries. The inferior conjunction is a fancy way of saying that Venus has come into a conjunction with the sun, and she's retrograde at the time. The inferior conjunction always happens when Venus is retrograde, and it's a conjunction with the sun. Then from March 23rd to April 12th, we have the morning star phase. And that has a very different quality that I'm going to go over in the presentation. And then April 12th, Venus stations direct. So she slows down again, comes to a standstill, and begins to retrace her steps back across the degrees that she just was in. So then from April 12th to May 15th, you have the post-retrograde shadow phase. She's still not moving at her normal pace, but she is moving direct again. And then May 15th, she has completely left the shadow and she's starting to move at her regular pace again until January 5th, 2026. And we have the superior conjunction at 14 degrees of Capricorn. And that is, again, the sun and Venus come together in a conjunction. But this time Venus is moving direct. So the inferior conjunction always happens with Venus retrograde and the sun, and the superior conjunction always happens with Venus direct and the sun. Inferior and superior do not mean better and greater. It just means that in the inferior conjunction, Venus is closer to between the Earth and the sun, and at the superior conjunction, Venus is further away. That's what that means. And just know that this is the timeline for 2025. When Venus stations retrograde next, it will be completely different timing and it will be in different degrees of the zodiac. Okay, so Venus stations retrograde on March 1st, 2025 at 10 degrees of Aries. As I said, at this point in her cycle, Venus has slowed down to the point of standing still as she changes direction, begins moving backwards, and retraces her steps. The energy of the planet is very concentrated at this point, especially at the 10-degree Aries point of the zodiac, because as she's slowing down, she spends a lot more time at that particular degree, in this case 10 Aries, and just sits there for a longer time until she starts to move backwards, and she's still at 10 degrees for several days. So when Venus stations retrograde, it begins like a turning inward, like there's a backward motion within the self. There's an internalized process that takes place. And this is where one goes to review and process feelings from the inner world. Sometimes this happens because of an event that may cause one to go within, or just a natural inclination to start to turn in and question things around values, beauty, relationship dynamics, those kinds of things. So if you were to go outside at this point in the evening, you will see Venus as an evening star. She is very bright in the sky during the evening star phase. And that's why I think this is another one of the reasons I think that this particular retrograde journey is so profound and prophetic for humanity. Because, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we didn't have this technology. We didn't have, software systems that ran birth charts. There were just people who would look up in the sky, whose lives were much more attuned to nature, because of that it was a necessity. They had to understand the natural rhythms of the world around them for their resources, for food, for comfort, to prepare for the seasons. So people were just more attuned to the natural cycles anyway. And then Venus would appear as an evening star, and it was always seen as this special moment in time. And in ancient times, they saw the celestial bodies as gods and goddesses. So they would see this as a goddess that wanted their attention, that had a message. There was something significant happening with this particular goddess. So I just love that part of it, that it's just so visible. And there are so many myths and stories that are based on this particular planet and her journey through evening star phase. And then so she'll be, each time you go outside, she'll be getting lower and lower and lower in the sky until she finally disappears. And she's gone for about 8 days. So during this time, it's very much feels like a winding down energy or a looking back period. There's a lot of times, if you're in the RE words, like review, reconsider, renew, revitalize, all of those words, you're in a retrograde energy. So this evening star phase specifically has a feeling that things are coming to a close, or it could be looking at particular relationship dynamics or personal values that are just going through a significant change. So the evening star Venus retrograde journey is a time for inner reflection and recapitulation. And Dane Rudyard uses the word recapitulation to describe this phase. And when I looked in the dictionary, it's defined as an act or instance of summarizing and restating the main points of something. So there's this restating or summarizing really important information or the main points. In biology, recapitulation means the repetition of an evolutionary or other process during development or growth. So that's another idea of it's being repeated and it's helping to evolve for the sake of growth. So this is a process of going back over a repeating theme. And when a theme gets repeated over and over, and that happens in astrology a lot, where themes are repeated for you to consider again and again, and you might be able to see your growth and development, maturity, and wisdom grow in relationship to that theme as you become more mature and more aware. So the idea that you're going over it again, but in a new way, it becomes more resonant, but it can also change how you experience it. And there can be variations on the theme. And yet it's still tied to some sort of core experience. It could be a core value or a core sense of beauty and creativity, or relationships again might come in. So it's just this idea of recapitulation. Something is repeating itself and it's a major theme and it's up for review for your consideration. During the evening star phase of Venus retrograde, there tends to be an internalized review of social conditioning specifically. The evening star tends to be more socially aware and considerate. There's like a more reserved and private quality to this evening star because it's considering how it's relating with others and how to maybe keep approval at times. So they're more reserved and they're also slower to heal. Like if they do have a hard relationship experience, it takes an evening star Venus longer to recover from that. So it's quite possible with an evening star Venus that true thoughts and true feelings may be withheld from public view, and it creates a more private demeanor. And there still may be a need for approval or likability. The internalized review of relationship dynamics can create an experience of sorting and processing feelings from the inner world that rise up. And it could be that these feelings are rising up in response to being repressed or being unheard or being unexpressed due to some external or social conditioning that kept the peace or agreed to conform for the sake of connection with others. So during this particular phase, as this is coming up for review, you might be becoming aware of like, oh, this was really social conditioning. This was really me kind of going with what other people may have wanted. And so it just becomes a time to examine all of that. The standards and the values that may have been taken for granted, perhaps where you feel taken for granted or unappreciated or unheard, or maybe it could be that there are others in your life that feel unappreciated or unheard. So this particular phase of the evening star Venus tends to strip away these social niceties, and it kind of lays one bare in a vulnerability of really wanting to access a more pure creative expression or a more authentic version of relationships that wants to emerge. But first, before that can happen, there has to be the shedding of the cloak of niceties that one can wear during the evening star phase. So the evening star phase ends at the inferior conjunction. The inferior conjunction is the heart of the retrograde cycle. This is when Venus retrograde enters the heart of the sun. This happens March 22nd, 2025 at 2 degrees of Aries. So if you have planets at any of these degrees, so 10 degrees for the retrograde, 2 degrees for the inferior conjunction, and 24 Pisces for the direct, you might feel this Venus retrograde more acutely. I would say for the inferior conjunction, if you have planets at 2 Aries, 2 Libra, 2 Capricorn, or 2 Cancer, you're feeling this inferior conjunction a little more than others. At this time, Venus is no longer visible in the sky. She has descended and she has disappeared. She disappears for about 8 days, but the inferior conjunction only happens during this one particular day. And this is akin to a new moon moment. It's a new Venus moment where there's a seed planted and something wants to grow. It can be a seed of love and beauty, or a seed of renewed or rekindled self-worth and self-value. It's usually in the darkest and most internal parts of one's consciousness that this seed moment takes place. So the potential within the seed it remains hidden or unrealized until it has more time to grow. Like all seeds, it's kind of like down there in the dark, and it has to come up over time into its expression. So, like I said, Venus is not visible in the night sky during this time. And those ancient myths that, and as people were walking out and they see her in the night sky and then she's disappeared, in the ancient myths, oftentimes Venus was considered to have gone down into the underworld. And that's where she kind of has to go through this period of complete deconstruction that then leads to a resurrection or a rebirth. And that can happen with Venus carrying our sense of value, our sense of love, our sense of worth. And that can be found in our relationships. It can be found in our creativity. It can be found in our relationships with money. All of those things have been going through this deconstruction phase to come to this moment where it can have a new seed planted, and then it comes into a moment of rebirth and renewal. And Venus then appears in the morning as a morning star. So I don't know. I just think that's the coolest thing. The visibility of it, the visibility of her journey from an evening star down into the underworld and then coming back up as a morning star, it speaks so much to a feeling of rebirth and renewal. So at this point in her journey, in the retrograde phase, morning star phase, you could go out in the morning with the rising sun and you're going to see Venus very prominently rising in the morning. It's really beautiful. So the morning star Venus retrograde journey This part is about rebirth and renewal. This is from March 23rd to April 12th. Venus at 2 degrees Aries to 24 degrees of Pisces. So it's going to go back across the late degrees of Pisces. So here we have a very empowered feminine energy that has shed some of the social niceties that may have kept them confined or repressed. And this morning star Venus has been reborn. It kind of like comes forward with a warrior energy. You can see like the look in this woman's eye, like she's waking up and she's ready to confront. There's that stare of like I'm awake. I'm awake now. I see what it is. So it's as if someone is awakening from a deep slumber and can now see the path forward, and a path that might require some type of decoupling, not necessarily from a person. It could be from social norms or values that no longer serve the vision of who this person, who you want to become. And sometimes that can be very subtle, and sometimes that can be very obvious. So this morning star Venus is known for being much more independent and spontaneous, even at times eager and impulsive. Like it's just ready to come out and take on the world and take on this renewed sense of this is who I am, this is here what I'm here to do, whether you like it or not. So it's much more resilient and quicker to come back from challenging relationship experiences. And it tends to really lead with a sense of courage, lead with the heart. Definitely much more outspoken and extroverted. And then Venus stations direct. So that happens April 12th at 24 degrees of Pisces. And again, it's another slowing down and then a pivot and then changing direction. But this time the changing direction adds to that morning phase. It creates this forward move and feeling. And this becomes a time to reach out, to seek to connect, and to express the purpose that got planted at that seed in the inferior conjunction moment. So this is a time to start to pour yourself into creative projects, or there might be an impulse to like go out and relate based on new and changing values. Again, the repeating themes is like this is about an evolution. This is about a growth process that happens over time. And the more keyed in and tuned in you are to what that means for you and how this is showing up for you, the more profound it can be, the more empowering it can be. So there's just this sense that this new phase of development has begun. And this is going to now create like the waxing stage of the lunar cycle, but it's going to be more like the waxing stage of the Venus cycle, where she begins to grow, gather, expand over a period of time. And the expansion is taking place in the place of relationships, creativity, beauty. There's an expansiveness taking place. Then we have the superior conjunction, which is great. This is another major part of the retrograde cycle. I don't think a lot of people talk about it. They just give you the information about the retrograde portion, but because this happens when Venus is direct, so it's not really part of the retrograde cycle. But if the seed was planted at the inferior conjunction, and if we're using Dane Rudyard's model, which was based off the lunar model of the new moon and the full moon, the superior conjunction is the moment when that seed reaches its full expression. So this is like the full Venus, like akin to the full moon moment. This is the full Venus, where Venus enters the heart of the sun, and the desires and the things that you're attracted to, the things that your own attraction, your own values around doing the things that you enjoy, doing the things that you love. All of that has reached kind of a peak expression at that point. So this is just full of love, full of connection. It's a really sweet, saturated and overflowing with all things Venus. So here are some questions and some ideas for you to sit with. Make a list of some of your favorite people, places, and things. And sit down and look at that and think about, how does this list reflect your values? What do you really love? Write all of this down. I really encourage you to work with these questions. How often are you enjoying the things that you really love? And if you're not enjoying those things that you love, how can you reconnect to the things you really want in your life? So Venus is a planet of attraction and desire. And when you think about things that are on your list of your favorite people, places, and things, are there any that you're ready to let go of, that you've outgrown, that are not part of this growth process going forward? And which ones are they, and when and how would you release them? What creative projects can you return to? And how can they be revised and renewed in some way? And really ask yourself, what's up for review in the realm of relationships? Sometimes we can make it about a person. Absolutely agreed. It is a relationship with another person, but what's happening within you in the realm of relationships? Focus on yourself here, especially with Venus and Aries. What are you being asked to release or let go of? And where might you be in need of repair in relationship? This is a good time for that as well. And how do you release relationships with integrity? So these are all really beautiful questions. This is my presentation. I hope that you learned something today. I am doing readings for couples. I'm working with a lot of relationship-based astrology. So in my sessions, there are 3 sessions in a package for relationship astrology. Partner A's chart is read in the first session and partner B witnesses it. Then in the second session, partner B's chart is read and partner A witnesses it. And then in the third session, we do something called the composite chart. And in that, that's the relationship itself. And so that's another really beautiful part of it. You see the person for who they are, you see the other person for who they are, and then you see the relationship for what it is. So you can find me at starsongreiki.com, and I'm here for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.